Well, hello, Liberty. It's good to have you back. This is Ken McLemore. I serve as your missions pastor. Today we have D. Ray Davis with us today. I'll tell you a little bit about him a little bit in just a few minutes. But you know what? I wanted to, this session, we've been covering some things of how to reach our community. We started out with, really, it's the cornerstone of the Christian faith, which is the resurrection. Without the resurrection, we don't know that Christianity is true. So we started with that. And then we moved on into Islam. We moved on into atheism and some other apologetic stuff. Now I would like to start us to turn towards how do we actually talk to someone about the gospel. And you know what? There are many ways to do it. There are a ton of ways to do it. I remember the old days, D-Ray, we used to go door to door. And we'd knock on the door. Nowadays, if you do that, you got to watch out. You might get, they either won't come to the door because they have a camera and know why you're there, or they just won't answer. And so we found that that's not as effective. It was interesting when I was in seminary, one of my professors told me the stats from Southwestern. He said, largest seminary in the world at the time. And he said, out of the people that came to Christ at the door, 1% were in church a year later. Wow. 77% were in the church a year later if a friend brought them and they engaged them. And as you know, we've been teaching you that this is a process. If you can share the gospel, share the gospel. We want you to know the gospel. But we don't really want to teach a canned presentation. Mm-hmm. And so today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. And D-Ray, I believe it's what Jesus did. It's basically storying. Absolutely. And that doesn't take the place of Bible study. That doesn't mean it's the only way. It's a way. And if you feel like God's leading you to present the straight gospel and just go down through there, Jesus was born, he died, and he was raised from the dead, and he saved us from sin. We want you to do that. Never hear us not say that. Absolutely. But in today's world, we want to give you something a little bit, another tool in your tool bag to go out and do it. And you know what, D-Ray? My first foray into storying was in Africa. We went over there, and a real good friend of both of ours, Dr. Nick Ripken, he's one of my mentors and has taught me a lot. He said, truth travels in families and in stories. And, I saw that when we went to buy a rug in Africa. Now, you live there. You know what it's like. We went in there, and I was expecting to go to lay down some cash, and we walk out with a rug. 3 hours later, we did walk out with a rug, but it took 3 hours because they're a culture that values the relationships and personal friendships. And so as they sat there on the mats, our missionary friend was telling stories. And they were going stories back and forth because in that culture, stories was the way they derived truth. And that was eye-opening for me, D-Ray. It was eye-opening. But you know what? I began to see that a lot of our strategies that you and I have learned for reaching people overseas are coming back to America to help us reach our own people. And I find that fascinating. Did you know that Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, he has even banned all PowerPoint presentations from his boardroom? He said this. He said, revealed that the narrative structure is more effective than PowerPoints in expressing things. And I thought that's amazing. One of the books I read in my research, D-Ray, says that stories are remembered 24 times more than a PowerPoint presentation. That's powerful, guys. I mean, if you tell me a story, I can remember that. So my goal for today is I want us to learn a little bit about storying. I want us to learn how to, in a more natural way, to be able to tell people about Jesus instead of just, like one thing I learned a long time ago, which was, it was a 45-minute presentation of us presenting something. If you can get somebody to listen to that, that's great. I'm not saying don't do that. But most times nowadays you can't get that. Okay, right. And D-Ray will share more about that later. So to help us do that today, I needed to bring somebody that's helped me a lot. D-Ray's been a good buddy for so many that many years, yeah. And so it's probably at least 15 or 20. Yeah. And so somewhere around there. But you know what? D-Ray is a good friend, but he's also helped me understand and learn about story. And so D-Ray, I'm just going to say this. You can tell me if I'm wrong. You've worked for the IMB for
31 years.
31 years. So he comes down to us from the IMB. We have a similar background, is that we both, coming out of college, worked at defense contractors.
Yep.
Felt the call to missions. I went to Russia. You went to Africa.
Yep.
And then D-Ray's been home. And I'll let him share more about his story later. But he now works with the International Mission Board, which is the largest mission board in the world. But it's also the one that's up the street in Richmond. It's the one we work with. And when you give Lottie Moon money, that goes to our missionaries. 100% goes to the field. And that is the IMB, just to give you by way of explanation. But here's the cool thing. D-Ray teaches every one of our missionaries, and there's over almost 3,900 of them, right? Something like that. When they come home from the field, he teaches them this. And he teaches them how to story not only their story, but he teaches them how to be effective in telling stories. And so I brought him today. And so D-Ray, welcome, buddy. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. And just to reiterate something you said a moment ago about PowerPoint, I read in an article some time ago, it said, the quote is something to the effect of, PowerPoint can suck the life out of any presentation. And it's because people learn by narrative.
They do.
And they remember by narrative, and just seeing words on a screen, especially a lot of words, is not effective. Not that you can't ever use PowerPoint, but
Right.
you have to be very careful how you use it.
And you know, I've seen that in politics too.
Absolutely.
There's one political party that's really good at showing a narrative that may not even be factual.
Yeah.
Or it may be factual. And both of them have done this.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's more effective when some of these political parties use that story as a powerful tool for conveying truth.
Well,
But take it from there, D-Ray.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about why we should story. Tell us anything you want to tell us.
Well, one thing I love to just share is just a couple of passages out of Psalms, out of Psalm 145. Just for a second, listen to this. One generation will declare your works to the next and will proclaim your mighty acts. I will speak of your splendor and glorious majesty and your wondrous works. They will proclaim the power of your awe-inspiring acts, and I will declare your greatness. They will give a testimony of your great goodness and will joyfully sing of your righteousness. They will speak of the glory of your kingdom and will declare your might, informing all peoples of your mighty acts and of the glorious splendor of your kingdom. And what I hope you hear in that is not that doctrine is bad. Doctrine and theology is great. But if we're not declaring, if we're not telling the story of his mighty acts, that is where the power is.
That's good.
That is where the power is.
And you know what? You know what, D-Ray, you hit upon something. This isn't in our script, but you think about the Asbury Revival right now.
Absolutely.
The story and the narrative come out of that, and people are hungry. And they're going so much that they had to shut it down and say, okay, we're going to let you go to your own college campuses now and do the same thing. And that is a great example of it. You know what?
I love a quote that I heard some time ago, read in a book called Go Tell It. It's really a journalism book, but listen to this quote. Too many people have been too bored for too long.
Wow. I love it.
And in the course that you referred to that I teach, by the way, it's I like to give credit to Wycliffe Bible translators. They use this method to teach their missionaries. But one of the things we're teaching is how to stand in front of audiences.
Right.
And I would just say that some of the principles for this speaking in front of audiences goes for one-on-one conversations as well.
Right.
Respecting who you're speaking to, not to just say, you're here to listen to my whole story,
Right.
but to think about how you're going to communicate your story.
But you know what? You may have it down later, but you told me one time, because I went through the course, and we've had D-Ray come back up and teach our missionary training program for high schoolers, 2414. We've had him teach this course there, and Wycliffe did a great job. But didn't they improve something like 29 or 30% of their what they were trying to achieve, which was donations for them?
Yeah, what they report is that when their missionaries take the course, and let me underscore this, and utilize
and
what they learned,
do what they're supposed to do.
that set of missionaries who adhered to, they believed the truth that people only listen to a certain amount.
Right.
They incorporated the lessons. That group raised their support in half the time.
Wow.
So you ignore these realities, you don't raise you take longer,
Yeah.
you do incorporate these realities, you raise support in half the time.
And you know what? I hope you can see that it's not, you're not trying to raise money or get money out of people, but it's kind of illustrative of how powerful the story can be and how effective communication can work to get across a point.
Yeah, one of the another quote out of that book, Go Tell It. Mission stories should be energizing the church about the Great Commission. Yet, missionaries and their stories and their display booths and their ceremonial outfits often evoke a collective yawn from so many sincere, devoted believers. And it's not that the stories are bad, it's how they're told.
Yeah.
So the stories of what God is doing around the world are exciting. It's just when you don't take it seriously how you're going to communicate the story, respecting the person you're sitting with or the group you're standing before, it becomes boring.
Well, you know what? That brings us to a point, too, because you mentioned something that made me think about. There's really talking about two different kind of stories here, aren't we?
Absolutely.
We're talking about, I'm telling, I just got home from a mission trip, and I got to share. You know, I got to share. I've been there 1,000 times. My wife just came back, and she from Africa, and she was so excited, and she just had to share. And I love listening to her. I did tell her though I'm not moving to Africa, but
You should.
You should. But then there's but there's also sharing the gospel through the story in there.
Yeah, at the heart of this is storytelling.
Right.
And then that shows up in different ways. You're either trying to evangelistically share a story, your own testimony, passages from the Bible, or the other side is that I spend more time on, obviously now with missionaries, is helping them tell their stories. And if I could break it down, I would say, like, thinking your testimony, thinking evangelistically, Revelation 12:11 says, we actually overcome Satan by, obviously, the blood of the Lamb,
Right.
but also the word of our testimony. And I tell people to stop for a minute and think about how much power God gives our story. I like to say that a testimony is an ancient truth brought into a contemporary life. It's the age-old truths of Scripture, but it's shown up today.
Yeah.
So how can you tell that in such a way that it shines on the ancient truths?
Yeah.
So that's
awesome.
evangelistically. I mean, 1 John 4:14, we have seen and we testify that the Father has sent the Son as the world's Savior.
Yeah.
Our stories are to reveal that.
Yeah.
So that's the testimony or evangelistic use. And again, at the heart of it is, how do you use storytelling techniques with unbelievers?
You know, I was sitting here thinking, you think about this too. Man, the secular world uses that in incredible ways.
Absolutely.
You cannot watch a weight loss commercial for either Weight Watchers or Marie Osmond, or you name somebody up there, that they're giving stories, testimonies.
Yep.
This is how this product changed my life. That's what it all is. They don't go into facts. They don't say 33% of us that use this product. Yeah, they go into stories that say, man, I was sick, I was this, I was that, and I use this product, and man, I feel great. And people grab onto that testimony, don't they?
Absolutely. And the reason, Ken, at the bottom line of it is people are human.
Exactly.
And stories are about humanity.
Yeah,
and I
that's
don't
right.
care if it's about the gospel or weight loss.
Right.
It is a human story.
Right.
And it's human to human. It's life on life, not just facts.
And you know what? I think we also put ourselves in that story.
Absolutely.
We also, God changed your life, really? Yeah. I need that.
Yeah.
I need that. We've had stories coming out of here recently that Pastor Grant has shared about people who didn't even believe in God, atheists, that came and saw and said, I want what they have in their lives. And so, boy, they put themselves in that story, and all of a sudden they are there with the gospel.
I tell our missionaries, when you hear a story, how do you ever notice the fact that you've almost entered the story? You're almost there as a side person watching it. And if a well-told story pulls the listener in, and they actually feel like they're a part of it. And what happens in that is it becomes a part of them. And the lessons in the story actually become, instead of me trying to download facts,
Right.
I draw you into a story and you absorb the truth.
Right.
It's very different, but it's subtle, but it's,
Wow.
bottom line, it's human.
But you know what? They do inspire us. It does. It inspires us in incredible ways. And so I think that's awesome. I think you had some scripture passages here that inspired us. If I could read one, it's
Yeah.
Acts 14:27. It says, after they arrived and gathered the Antioch church together, they, Paul and Barnabas, reported everything God has done with them and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. Now, those Gentiles is us.
Yeah.
Unless you're Jewish
Yeah.
in your people group, then the rest is us.
Yeah, and here's the discipline that I tell missionaries. I would also say it to anyone in your church who has either experienced a mission opportunity locally or around the world, that you have a responsibility, and I underscore this, to do it well,
Right.
to be careful about how you share your stories, but to come back and report what it is, that psalm, one generation declaring the works to the next,
Right.
proclaiming the mighty acts, reporting back. And that's what Paul is doing here. He and Barnabas come back and reported everything God had done
Yeah.
among the Gentiles.
Man, that's awesome. And so, D-Ray, I'd like to move into an area. We've seen stories be effective.
Yeah.
We have seen that be effective here in America. And that's what I think is so cool, that how some of these things from overseas are coming back to help us reach our own people. Along with that, I would love to just share too, before we get into this next part, is one of my eye-opening experiences is a mutual friend of ours who's now passed away is Dr. Jim Slack.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to Nick, and I said, hey, I've learned a lot from you. Who can I learn from? He said, Dr. Slack. Got to meet Dr. Slack.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have been up there visiting you one day, and Dr. Slack, so I meet him, and I said, Dr. Slack, I hear I need to learn from you. I said, how do I do that? And he's a brainiac, had his PhD in orality, illiteracy, orality type stuff. And he said, if you'll drive up once a month, I'll spend the whole day with you, actually. And all it cost me was lunch, And so he would just download this stuff. And one of the things, D-Ray, he downloaded to me was facts for this area. I said, Dr. Slack, I want to learn overseas stuff, but I want to learn how that affects us here. And he said, let me show you. And he pulls up the 2000 census for our area. Now, a lot of people don't believe me in this, but I went back and looked. The 2000 census for literacy and illiteracy. He said 28% of the people from the 2000 census were totally illiterate in Hampton Roads. 1.7 million people, 28% of them can't even read. 31% are what they call functional illiteracy, which means they can read 8th or 9th grade level, maybe even higher, but that's not how they really learn. They don't learn by reading. They can read something, but it's not how they really. So 59% don't learn by reading. So when we pass out, whatever we pass out, reading materials, a lot of them will just throw it, toss it, even when it comes to the Bible. Yeah. And so that helped me to begin to see that we have to start finding ways of orality, storying, video, ways that are different than just reading to communicate the gospel. That was eye-opening for me. That was eye-opening.
I would even add that, and it's not you're illiterate, that's bad.
Right.
Or you can read, that's good.
Right.
Even those that are literate, often they prefer to receive their information through story or through a narrative of some sort.
And that's me.
And it's me too. I prefer narrative. I find I can look at things I believe now that I really am passionate about, and I go back to where it began. It began life on life with someone hearing the narrative of their experiences,
right.
And it changed my life. And I mean, as you referred to earlier, I was at an aircraft company, and 31 years later, I've given 31 years to service overseas and with helping missionaries relate well to churches.
Yeah.
And it didn't come from me reading a fact.
Right.
That this is important. It came from life on life, that kind of thing. So,
D-Ray, I think there's some things that would help us is what is it that makes a story so effective? I mean, not that we're going to memorize these and be kind of rote about it,
right.
But it's good to have them in the back of our mind saying, I really want to be effective. And so what does that mean to be effective? What are some elements of that?
Yeah. One is that I tell missionaries that you just have to learn to accept this fact. People learn through stories. You can list facts all you want, but you have to change your belief system that this really matters.
Right.
And so you learn that storytelling is a universal practice. It's not an American practice. It's not an African practice.
Right.
It's universal.
It is.
Storytelling is what people use to transmit history. It's what they use to transmit their beliefs, to pass on culture, values, all those sort of things. The other thing about it is people like human interest stories.
Love them.
Any pastor, after they've studied and worked really hard, it's kind of a downer when people really start listening when they start telling a story instead of all the facts that they've worked through to communicate. But you begin a story, and I've observed it. People perk up.
Yeah.
And so it's because people resonate with those stories. They remember stories as well.
They do. And I've noticed that about myself, maybe you have too, that the pastors that I really like, I want it to be intellectually stimulating. I do. I really want that. But when they can weave in some illustrative stories from history or other sources outside of, maybe even outside of their own church, you know, that is incredible. It's like, really, I didn't know that. I mean, it just brings you into what they're saying factually.
Yeah. Again, what I hope you hear is it's not that the facts of the Bible, the doctrine, the theology is not good. That's not it.
No, it's not at all.
But ancient truths are made real to people when they hear it in a, hey, this makes sense for today.
Right.
And here's a life
Right.
that it made sense in.
Right.
So
that's awesome.
The other thing, people think in pictures. You know, we're not just a bunch of words in our head. We think in pictures. And so a story delivers mental images which resonate and they stick.
It does.
The other thing is it's emotion, it's emotion, not logic, that move people. It's not the facts. Facts are very good, but it's actually the story that moves. It's emotional that moves them. That's what influences them.
And I will say this, I agree with you, but there are some guys that we would have to admit that facts motivate them. So we're not saying that nobody.
Yeah.
We're not saying that. Please don't hear that.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying. We're saying overall, a lot of times it's emotional. Like you hear the sad story of somebody, you know, living through a war. Like I just heard from the Middle East. I just got back from, and hearing a guy's story. I was going into this country and how he had escaped and he lives in America now. He's doing well. He's doing great, as a matter of fact. But his moving story, not the facts of there was a war in my country and I left, that didn't help move, but his story. I had to cross at night this river up to this deep in winter and cold, freezing refugee camps for a year, and I made it to America. And now he's a millionaire, you know.
That's a lot different than I'm a refugee.
Exactly.
That's
and
the
there's
point.
24,000 refugees in my camp, and we stayed there 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that doesn't really do much.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Yeah,
but
and
we're not saying logic, nothing.
Yeah.
We're not saying that doesn't move people. We're saying we believe that overall emotional does.
Emotion
help
is
move you.
is powerful. We already mentioned this, but it bears repeating. Stories actually transport the person into the story with them.
Yeah.
And they can actually see.
That's cool.
The other thing that I like to make sure people know is storytelling is not just a gift, it's a skill.
Wow.
So some people are born good storytellers, and honestly, they make me mad because I'd like to tell people my first speech ended up being 2 words because I panicked, I froze. It was at a pep rally for a football game, and I stood there at a microphone, and you know, there's a lot of reasons, but it was my first speech, and I finally realized it's really getting uncomfortable, and I finally just said, "Go Patriots." And that was my first speech.
And what'd you do with the other 29 minutes?
No, I sat down. And so I like to make sure everybody knows it is something you can develop.
Okay.
You can take note of the disciplines that you need to employ and do them and stick with them. So it's a gift for some, but it's also a skill that you can develop.
Cool.
So,
well, how do we develop that skill? Can you help us with that?
well,
or
you know, what I thought I might do is just tell you a story.
okay, tell me this.
The reason I picked this story is it helps you get to know me a little bit better, which you do, but it helps the audience get to know me a little bit. But it also illustrates how you can be very disciplined in telling a story, because I would like to tell you all so much more about this story. But in the time that we have, it's in front of an audience, it's good to be disciplined and only tell bits of the story.
Okay.
So to do that, I would just tell people, on February 18th, 2019, I received a text message at 12:48 p.m. from a friend, Leanne Fort. I was at lunch with a friend of mine, Scott Logsdon, and I got a text that just had 3 words in it, and it changed my life. Come home immediately. My colleague and I had just finished lunch. We were about to get coffee, but I was concerned, obviously, so I decided to call Leanne, and she answered, and she was crying. And she told me that my wife, Kim, had collapsed, and paramedics were at my house. She told me I needed to come home. Well, Scott prayed for me very quickly, and I rushed home. The full weight and the severity of what I was facing was really prevented from caving in on me. I had a sense of alarm and all of that. I had to get home, and I felt that urgency to get home now. I drove in silence for the next 20 minutes, and I didn't know what to think, and honestly, I was prevented from thinking much at all. I had 2 fleeting thoughts that passed through my mind quickly. Neither of them lodged. I remember the first thought was, why haven't they called me to tell me where they're taking her? And another thought was, what sort of long-term care might be needed for my wife? Well, I arrived at my house to be escorted to my den. I sat on the couch. Leanne sat next to me on the left, and without any delay whatsoever, a police officer stated to me, we're sorry to have to inform you that your wife has passed away. So I share that very emotional story for me. This was 4 years ago. Actually, this past Saturday was the 4-year mark, and my new wife, Amanda, and I, who've been married almost 11 months now, went to be with my daughter to mark the 4th anniversary. But I share it.
And you know what I was going to tell them? For some of y'all, you were at the Storying Conference, the evangelism conference that we did with D. Ray and
right.
Kim.
Yeah, Kim was here with me.
Before, one of the last pictures
That's exactly
was
right.
Carmel and I with D. Ray and Kim at Firehouse Coffee at Fort Monroe.
That's exactly right.
And so some of y'all may already know D. Ray and know his story. That's what happened after he left our conference.
And again, I share it, one, because there is so much more to that 4 years of story.
Right, right.
But in front of an audience, I can't tell all of it.
Right.
It's taking the audience captive, hostage almost.
That's a good
to
word.
tell all of my story.
Yeah.
And now, over coffee, if you and I afterwards wanted to go talk more,
I love that.
you can. But in front of an audience, you have to respect the audience and tell only a part of the story to get the
Now let
main
me ask you
message
this
apart.
though: the audience could be one person.
It could be one person.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't have to be a speech in front of a group.
And you also have to be careful not to take them hostage.
Right.
And
right.
get permission. If now Ken says, I want to hear more.
Let's go get coffee.
And that happens, and you can go and expound on your story.
Right.
But I use that to illustrate the discipline I have put into about a 2-minute slot, my story of loss.
Wow.
And I've got a lot more I could tell you, Ken, and you've had to listen to some of it.
Oh, I love it.
But in front of an audience,
Yeah.
you can tell it very quickly.
Wow. And so really when we're talking, this can go 2 ways. This can go an audience. This can go a group.
Absolutely.
This can go a Bible study, because there's Bible studies about storying through stuff like that. We have some of those materials if you're interested. But it can go a one-on-one.
Absolutely.
And it can be, we call it a hook or a bait.
Yeah.
And you can say, wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Don't have time right now, D. Ray.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more.
Yeah.
And can we get together later?
Yeah. And at the base of this, kind of the bottom line of this is respecting your audience, whether it be one
that's
person
good.
and not being abusive. I mean, Christians can often be abusive with the gospel. If we want to tell it all right now.
Right.
And you really need permission. You need to read people. Am I being offensive with not just the gospel message? Yes, that's offensive to some. I get that. But am I being an offensive person by trying to grab your time now and not just relate to the person?
Well, and you bring up a good point that we've talked about here before, but I guess we need to see it also that it can be a process.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be, they got saved right there, right at that moment. it can be a process that over time we can say, I've got time on this. Now, some people say they might die tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if they're not ready to listen to you at the gospel then why,
Read the person.
Read
You
them.
got to read them and learn how to draw them in. I think also the commitment on our side is, am I willing to begin a relationship with this person, or do I see them as a project? I want to tick a box. I shared the whole gospel with them, and I'm moving on. They weren't interested. Maybe they were. Maybe they were more interested in, do you care about me?
And that's the
relate.
That's a key point. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, do we care about them? Man, we've got to care about them.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be effective, Liberty, I hope you see that my whole belief system and strategy. People always ask me about local missions, and they always say something to the effect of, what projects you got. We want to do those. Those are great. We're never going to stop doing those. But we can't make enough projects for the 14,000 members at Liberty to go do. We don't have a staff that big. We really believe in the biblical model of you, the believer, going into your community and doing just what you're teaching us to do. Engage people with stories, talking to them. It's kind of like water over sand.
Yeah.
We are the water going out over, and we just seep into the culture and meet people. And so that's kind of that's kind of the way I look at it. So you've given us some of those things. That's emotional impact with your wife.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So let's move on to, you mentioned something. I really want to, we're kind of hitting on at the end here, not the end, but just what we were just talking about. I want to hit on the brevity part.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, what you've seen in that, and help us with that.
Yeah. Again, respect teaches you to do the hard work of how I'm going to tell a story.
So so you're suggesting we work ahead of time.
I do.
To be ready.
When I mean, in the sense of speaking in front of an audience.
Okay.
When I stand up, I know exactly what I'm going to say.
Wow.
Now, people may say, are you taking the Holy Spirit out? No, I'm saying the Holy Spirit and I've been working on it.
Yeah.
But I love what an African pastor said to a group of Sunday school teachers. He was kind of getting on to them. He was scolding them for not preparing before they came. And he said, you were actually using the Holy Spirit for a skateboard. And I remember thinking, I think he means a scapegoat, but it fits. Are you going to just jump on the Spirit's skateboard and not prepare and ride it and see where it takes you in front of people?
Yeah.
That's, I think, abusive to the audience.
Yeah.
Do the hard work ahead of time, work on it, and realize that crafting your stories, crafting what you're going to say, learning how to get to the point, because brevity is powerful.
It is.
It's a powerful tool to be able to illustrate your point. I love what one author wrote. These two guys, Phil Campbell and Gary Millar, in this book called Saving Eutychus. If you remember, Eutychus is the guy that fell out of the window when Paul was preaching because he fell asleep.
Yeah.
They said the title of their book is Saving Eutychus, How to Preach God's Word and Keep People Awake. But this quote just grabs it for me. It's easier for your listeners to catch a baseball than a handful of sand.
Ooh.
And so you want to throw them something that they can catch.
Right.
Not just a handful of sand that just scatters and falls to the ground.
Right.
And a story, again, we've said this, but it should use visual images and emotional impact. You have to be careful about the length, the pace, the rhythm, the timing. And again, this may seem over-prepared, but you practice these things in front of, before you go. I've done it in front of a mirror. I've done it in my car. I've done it in my hotel room. I've practiced those things. because you can ignore this all you want, but the attention span of Americans is shrinking.
Man, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I want you to, I learned that on my first mission trip from Liberty. We took a team in, and we were sitting in Russia in my interpreter's house, and we were having a little party. And one of the American girls on our team, two people on our team, and after about a minute, she was telling a story, and this guy just got up and left.
Yeah.
And she looked at Mark and said, "Mark, where are you going?" He goes, "You got to learn to tell that thing faster. I don't have that."
Yeah.
So what is a good time limit, time frame for a story? When we talk about brevity?
Yeah. Well, I'll start at the very shortest. There was a study that's been done that said goldfish have a longer attention span than we do.
Wow.
And that is 8 seconds. So, okay, you can't tell a story in 8 seconds.
Right.
So we can't do that. But what you need to recognize is the internet and the fact that you are in charge of how long you're on a page or a video, that is shrinking attention span. So in front of an audience, we have what we call a 2-minute rule. Tell a story within 2 minutes. I could tell you the story of the loss of my wife in 30, 45 minutes or an hour. But in front of an audience, I'm going to craft it to 2 minutes.
Okay.
Because I want to communicate. I know you can't listen to all of it. Over coffee again, we could talk
Right.
more details.
Right.
But we really discipline ourselves to craft our story to 2 minutes. Now, what I don't want you to hear is every presentation is 2 minutes.
Right.
But the flow of a talk needs to acknowledge what we call the 2-minute rule.
Okay.
I try to keep one topic to 2 minutes. Again, I throw a baseball, not a handful of sand. And at the end of 2 minutes, I change and go to something else. Now, it's not trying to like tennis, bouncing a ball back and forth. It's realizing that the ebb and flow of a conversation or a talk needs to acknowledge to move on.
Wow.
2 minutes.
Wow. Well, you know what we're going to do, D-Ray? We're going to wrap it up right here and come back next week. And we're going to let you help us build that a little bit better. I mean, we've already heard and been inspired that the story inspires people, that brevity is king, and that we need to start learning. And also, D-Ray, we're talking about our testimony here, but I would say that, like Nick has taught us all, that we are maybe the only Bible somebody's going to ever read. It's us. And so I think Bible stories are incredibly important too. And this kind of applies there, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so we're going to come back next time, and D-Ray's going to help us build that framework of how to tell a story. So thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.